The Norman conquests during the Middle Ages are well known today, whether it was Richard the Conqueror invading England in 1066, Robert de Hauteville claiming Calabria and Apulia, or Bohemond de Hauteville taking Antioch in the First Crusade. However, one of the lesser-known Norman conquests was in North Africa during the 12th century. By 1140, almost all of southern Italy and Sicily had been unified under King Roger II, bringing an end to decades of wars and conquests across the region. However, this wasn't the end of the Norman conquests in the Mediterranean. In addition to their role in the Crusades and the wars against the Byzantines, in 1148, the Normans would, for a brief period, rule over a large section of North Africa's coast, comprising parts of modern-day Tunisia and northwestern Libya. In this video, we'll examine the Norman conquests of North Africa, the political situation in the region during the 11th and 12th centuries, its trade with Sicily, how the Normans conquered North Africa's coast, how they governed their new lands, and how it would ultimately fall to the Almohads. The Norman territories in North Africa during the mid-12th century are sometimes called the Kingdom of Africa. This name can be confusing as it doesn't refer to the entire continent, but to a specific region in its north. The region of Africa comprised what is now northeastern Algeria, Tunisia, and Libya's Tripolitania region. Its name originates from the Roman province of Africa, which was established following the end of the Punic Wars and the annexation of the Carthaginian heartland in the 2nd century BC. The territory would remain in Roman hands until the 5th century AD, when the Germanic Vandals and local semi-Romanized Berber kingdoms carved up the region. The Eastern Roman Empire would reclaim most of North Africa in 534, establishing the Praetorian Prefecture and later the Exarchate of Africa. However, like the Vandals, the Romans would only hold the region for around a century. At the end of the 7th century, the rising Umayyad Caliphate would conquer the whole of North Africa from the Romans and the local Berber kingdoms. Despite the conquest, the region continued under its Arabic name, Ifriqiya. Following the collapse of the Umayyad Caliphate in 750, the region of Ifriqiya changed hands several times between local emirates. One of these local rulers was the Zirid dynasty, who started out as vassals of the Shia Fatimid Caliphate, before breaking away in the 1040s. The Fatimid Caliph, in retaliation, encouraged the Bedouin tribes, the Banu Hilal and the Banu Sulaim, to invade Zirid territory. This invasion resulted in Ifriqiya falling into a decades-long power vacuum. The Zirids abandoned most of their inland territory, including their capital, Kairouan, for the coastal city of Mahdiya. Numerous groups moved to fill the power vacuum left behind by the retreating Zirids. The Bedouins seized the Zirids' former inland territories, and the neighboring Hamadid Emirate expanded east into Ifriqiya. At the same time, the Banu Khazrun took control of Tripoli, and the Khurasanids took Tunis, both of which effectively became independent emirates. With the countryside already hurt by drought, now becoming a war zone, famine gripped Ifriqiya, making the region reliant on imported grain. While North Africa saw the rise and decline of the Zirid Emirate, across the Mediterranean, a similar scenario was playing out in Sicily. The Chalbid Emirate of Sicily, like the Zirids, started as vassals of the Fatimids. However, by the 1040s, weakened by conflicts with Italian city-states and the Byzantines, the emirate had fragmented into several fiefdoms run by local rulers. In 1060, the Normans, fresh from their conquests of southern Italy, arrived on Sicily, beginning an over 3-decade-long war for the island, battling regional rulers, Chalbid remnants, and their Zirid allies. The Normans fought several battles against the Chalbid-Zirid alliance, most notably their victory at the Battle of Mizilmeri in 1069, which resulted in the Zirid expeditionary force abandoning Sicily and returning to Ifriqiya. By 1091, all of Sicily was made into a Norman-ruled county. In 1130, the county of Sicily and the Norman holdings in southern Italy were brought together as a unified kingdom under the rule of King Roger II de Hauteville. Despite conquering all of Sicily and southern Italy, the Normans' wars in the Mediterranean were not done. In addition to their role in the First Crusade, clashes with the Byzantine Empire, and the annexation of Naples and Abruzzo, the Normans of Sicily turned their gaze south to Ifriqiya. Despite the Norman conquest of Sicily, the two regions continued to trade with each other. Ifriqiya's reliance on Sicilian grain primarily spurred on this trading relationship, as the region suffered from famine and war. Roger II used Sicily's position as a grain exporter to extract large payments of gold from North African towns and exert political influence over the region. However, one of the causes that led the Normans to exert more direct control over North Africa was the presence of pirates. North Africa was no stranger to piracy, such as the Vandal pirates who raided Greece and Italy in the 5th century, or the later Ottoman-backed corsairs raiding European ships and coasts in the 16th century. Taking advantage of the declining Zirids, North African pirates went after gold and grain shipments and raided as far north as Norman-ruled Sicily and Calabria. In response, Roger II launched a campaign against the pirates based on the island of Jerba, capturing it in 1135. With the island as a base off the North African coast to raid from, the Normans became more involved in North African politics and conflicts. As the Zirid Emirate fragmented into small petty emirates and tribes, Norman raids began to give way to outright conquests similar to the Jerba campaign. Most notably, in 1146, Roger II invaded the city of Tripoli. Weakened by famine and internal conflict between locals and the Banu Khazrun, the city fell to the Normans. Neighboring towns quickly submitted themselves to Norman overlordship. One of these towns was Gabas, whose governor, Yusuf, attempted to submit to the Normans, but was invaded and overthrown by the Zirid emir Al-Hassan ibn Ali. Yusuf's family fled to Roger II, who now had a casus belli against the Zirid Emirate. In 1148, Roger II sent a fleet under the command of his admiral, George of Antioch, to invade the Zirid capital of Mahdiya. Weakened by famine and internal strife, the city fell to the Norman invaders. Emir al-Hassan fled to Susa, though it too would fall later that same year, along with several other cities in the region. Al-Hassan again fled, this time further east to the Hammadid Emirate, marking the end of the Zirid Emirate. With the exception of Tunis, much of Ifriqiya by the end of 1148 was under the rule of the Normans, including many of its major commercial and political centers, such as Gabas, Mahdiya, Kairouan, Sfax, Susa, and Tripoli. While taking place simultaneously with the Second Crusade, the Norman conquest of North Africa isn't often included in that conflict. Roger II's wars in Ifriqiya were not motivated by religion. Instead, the Normans conquered the region more for economic and strategic reasons. While the region suffered heavily from both Bedouin and Norman invasions, its ports remained vital links in trade between Ifriqiya, Egypt, Spain, and Sicily, as well as the points where the trans-Saharan trade routes met the Mediterranean. Controlling those ports gave the Normans greater influence over their trade routes and the revenue that came with them. In addition, controlling Ifriqiya's coasts helped secure both Sicily's trade and coastlines from the North African piracy. These two factors shaped how the Normans governed their holdings in Ifriqiya. The Normans' governance of their North African territories was quite different from previous conquests. Rather than dividing up their new holdings among Norman nobles, as their counterparts did in England, most of Ifriqiya's aristocracy remained in place. While coastal cities like Tripoli and Mahdiya were taken by force, surrounding towns willingly submitted to Norman rule, thus avoiding war. As the Normans were primarily focused on controlling North African trade routes, keeping the local nobles in power would help stabilize their new administration. In addition, many of these nobles and the towns they governed were likely already trading partners with the Normans. With the defeat of the Zirids, all that may have changed in the end was the Normans cutting out a middleman and taking more direct control over the North African trade routes. However, with the Zirids' downfall, it fell to the Normans to keep order on Ifriqiya's coasts. Even before the fall of the Zirids, their decline and the power vacuum that followed allowed for the rise in piracy, such as those on the island of Jerba. The Norman garrisons in cities like Mahdiya and Tripoli would focus on keeping the pirates at bay. At the same time, the local nobles, who the Normans kept in their positions, would assist in policing the countryside and acting as a buffer against the Banu Halal and other tribes further inland. While the Normans were conquering the Zirid Emirate, the force that would ultimately drive them out of Ifriqiya was also on the rise, the Almohads. Originating in modern-day Morocco, then ruled by the Almoravid dynasty, the Almohads were founded by the Masmuda Berber religious leader Ibn Tumart, who was declared Mahdi in 1121. He and his followers would launch a war against the Almoravid dynasty, the rulers of northwestern Africa and southern Iberia. Following Tumart's death in 1130, Abd al-Mu'min succeeded him as leader of the Almohad movement. In 1133, he was proclaimed caliph rather than acknowledging the Shia Fatimid Caliph in Cairo or the Sunni Abbasid Caliph in Baghdad. In 1145, the Almohads overran the Muslim cities of southern Iberia, and 2 years later they seized the Almoravid capital of Marrakesh, establishing the rule of the Mu'minid dynasty, also known as the Almohad Caliphate. With western Maghrib and southern Iberia under their rule, the Almohads turned east, and in 1152 they overran the Hamidid Emirate. 2 years later they entered Ifriqiya, battling the Normans and the Banu Khorasan of Tunis. By the end of 1160, Tunis fell, and the Normans were expelled from Ifriqiya, 25 years after their first conquest in Jerba. The Almohads, in addition to enforcing their rule over Ifriqiya and the Banu Halal, reinstated the former Zirid emir, al-Hassan, as governor of the region. The Norman conquest of North Africa is less well known than their more famous wars in southern Italy and England. This may be due to how short Norman rule lasted in North Africa, or perhaps a lack of famous battles like Hastings or Civitate. However, examining the Norman conquest of Ifriqiya can give insight not only into a lesser-known Norman war, but also into the political situation in 12th century North Africa. Whether it was the various emirates that emerged after the decline of the Umayyad Caliphate, or the Bedouin migration spurred on by the Fatimids. It also shows that even during the time of the Crusades and the Norman conquest of Sicily, Christians and Muslims in North Africa and Sicily were not just in conflict, but also remained connected through trade and diplomacy. Sources used for this video are in the description. Thanks for watching.